Have you ever noticed how some people believe that a person's worth is defined by the job they do? It's more common than you think. Many judge a person's value by the clothes they wear or the title on their name tag, and that's exactly where the danger lies. Believing that those who serve are inferior and those who command are untouchable is a common mistake, but one that can come at a very high cost. That's exactly what happened to Letícia, a janitor who worked in a luxurious law firm. Every day, she endured veiled humiliation, disdainful looks, and sarcastic remarks from Cláudio, one of the most powerful partners in the office. But what Cláudio never imagined was that behind that broom, there was much more than he could ever dream of. How would you feel if you found out that the person you humiliated and dismissed every day was, in fact, someone who had the power to decide your future? Sounds like something out of a movie, right? But I promise you, this story really happened. Letícia wasn't just a simple cleaner. She was a brilliant lawyer, internationally recognized, who was there undercover, in complete silence, observing every move made by the staff. A few days after being disrespected, mocked, and ignored by Cláudio in front of everyone, she returned to the building. But this time, she wasn't wearing a uniform or holding a mop. She wore a sharp suit, high heels, and carried a contract that would completely change the dynamics of that place. Letícia had just bought the entire building. This is a story about justice, about power, and about the steep price of arrogance. It shows how humility is not weakness, but actually the greatest sign of strength someone can show. What happened next was one of the most powerful turnarounds ever witnessed. In front of everyone, Letícia confronted Cláudio with reality, exposed his abusive behavior, and gave him a lesson that would change his life forever. Want to know what that lesson was? Stick with me until the end, because what you're about to learn won't just impress you. It will completely transform the way you see the people around you. Letícia was the kind of person who knew how to make her presence felt without making noise. Her steps were soft, her voice polite, and her presence was like a whisper in the luxurious environment of that law firm. While the lawyers wore tailored suits and discussed million-dollar contracts, she picked up forgotten glasses from meeting rooms and cleaned the footprints of those who never looked her in the eyes. Cláudio, one of the most arrogant partners, treated her like part of the furniture. He walked past her without even noticing, even when she gently tried to warn him about a problem, whether it was a printer about to jam or a client waiting at reception. It's curious how the world teaches us to look down on those who serve, as if humility meant inferiority. Letícia wasn't just hurt by the looks of disdain, but by the total absence of any look. Being ignored hurt more than being mistreated. To Cláudio and many others there, it was as if she had no story, no past, no future. She was just the cleaner. But little did they know that every person carries an entire universe inside them. The most powerful stories of resilience often begin in the most unlikely places, and if you're paying attention, you'll realize that the greatest teacher might be wearing a uniform, holding a mop, and still carrying a mind as sharp as a blade of justice. And Letícia saw everything. She observed without judgment, but with surgical precision. She knew who pretended to be kind when the boss was watching, and who truly respected others. She recognized fake smiles and automatic displays of power. She wasn't part of the game, or at least that's what they thought. What no one knew was that Letícia wasn't there out of financial need. She was there strategically. Every detail she picked up on was part of something much bigger, something that was about to turn the tables, in a way Cláudio would never forget. Letícia wasn't just smart, she was a strategist. She had a resume that would make many there choke on their own egos. Graduated with honors, fluent in 3 languages, a master's degree abroad, and awards received in The Hague and Geneva for her work in human rights. But none of that was on display. She chose to hide her degrees and wear simplicity like armor. Because she knew, the world only shows its true face when it doesn't feel judged. And in that office, where the shine on shoes was noticed more than the brilliance of a mind, Letícia decided to enter in silence to see through the noise. Every corner, every conversation, every sideways glance was part of her internal map. She wasn't there by accident. She was quietly analyzing which building would host the next revolution in social law. While wiping down tables and enduring crude jokes, Letícia was mentally compiling a report as precise as a legal opinion. She knew exactly who pulled the rug from under others, who avoided eye contact with the security guards, who yelled at the cleaning staff, and who faked empathy in front of their superiors. And she did all this without ever raising her voice. Because true power doesn't need to show off, it watches. And in that, Letícia was a master. With every arrogant act, she mentally jotted down a new page for her future stories. She knew that soon, those who ignored her would have no choice but to hear the truth from someone they had judged inferior. And she wouldn't need to shout, she'd do it with class, with justice, and with evidence. The most intriguing part, Letícia had already founded her own firm. Yes, she owned one of the country's most promising emerging law practices, specializing in giving a voice to those who never had a microphone. Her plan was to set up the new headquarters in a central building, but first, she needed to understand the terrain. She wanted to feel the environment, Test the invisible values. And what better lab than that office? Full of diplomas on the walls but utterly lacking in humanity. Letícia wasn't just a cleaner, she was a visionary on a silent mission. And that mission was about to leap forward, because those with vision see beyond appearances. And now, she had everything she needed to play her next move on the board. The morning began like any other. Strong coffee in the break room, interns rushing with stacks of paperwork, Cláudio grumbling about a delayed meeting. Nothing unusual, until the sound of Leticia's confident heels echoed through the main lobby. But these weren't the soft, invisible steps from before. She walked in like someone who knew exactly where she was going. A tailored suit, hair elegantly pinned, folders in hand, and a confidence too large for that building because now, she owned it. Cláudio's eyes widened. He took a step back and mumbled something like, "Is this a joke?" Trying to laugh, but the smile died before it formed. That woman he had ignored days earlier was now the most powerful person in the room. It was a collective shock. The same elevator she used to clean now opened for her on the executive floor. The badge that never existed now granted unrestricted access. The receptionist who had never bothered to learn her name now asked if she could offer her a coffee. The world had turned upside down. But the truth was, it had always been upside down. The difference was, now someone was finally setting things right. The stories that truly move us are like this. They show that contempt can be a shortcut to your own downfall. And Cláudio felt it in his skin, in the eyes of his colleagues, in the office that used to be his kingdom, now ruled by someone he never respected. But the most powerful part was how naturally Letícia handled the situation. No loud revenge, no bitterness. She simply presented the acquisition documents, spoke with the building manager, and announced, "I'd like to gather all employees this Friday. We have important changes to share." No need for shouting or passive-aggressive jabs. Her silence spoke louder than any lecture. Hers was the kind of presence that silences a whole room. And for those paying attention, it was clear. The meeting wasn't just about a change in ownership, it was a transformation that would reshape the company's culture from top to bottom. Because when a woman with a story returns to the place where she was once dismissed, she doesn't return for revenge. She returns to show how the game is changed with class and courage. The conference room, usually reserved for strategic decisions, had never been so silent. Employees exchanged anxious glances, sensing that something big was about to happen, but no one dared to predict what. Letícia entered with steady steps, flanked by two trusted lawyers and the building's manager. She paused before speaking. When she opened the presentation, there were no graphs or profit charts. There was raw truth. Today, we're not here to talk about profits or contracts. We're here to talk about respect. Something that's been treated around here as if it were irrelevant. She clicked the remote, and the footage began. Security cameras captured Cláudio mistreating employees, making humiliating jokes, flaunting his arrogance toward anyone not wearing a tie. The atmosphere grew heavy. It was impossible to ignore. The recordings were clear, Cláudio refusing a greeting, throwing papers onto an intern's desk, shouting at a delivery worker, mocking a cleaner behind her back. Some employees looked down. Others widened their eyes. A few shifted uncomfortably, remembering that they once laughed at those moments. Letícia, in a calm and deliberate voice, paused the videos and asked, "If it were you, how would you feel? If it were your mother, your brother, do you truly think this is normal?" These questions weren't looking for answers, they sought impact. And they delivered. She wasn't there to humiliate, but to show that when you plant contempt, you harvest shame. The stories born from the courage to confront truth are the ones that truly change us. Letícia then announced that, from that day forward, all companies in the building would be invited to adopt a new code of ethics, drafted by her team. A living document, created to protect people, not just reputations. It laid out clear guidelines. Abusive behavior would lead to warnings or even dismissal. Everyone would go through training in empathy, nonviolent communication, and humanized leadership. And more. There would be a direct, anonymous reporting channel. She made it clear, from now on, respect won't be defined by job title but by the humanity a person carries. When she finished, she looked Cláudio in the eye and said, in a firm tone, "You'll be the first to experience the effects of this new code." The room was still immersed in heavy silence when suddenly, something pierced through that invisible barrier of fear and omission. A soft but steady voice. It was Carolina, the youngest intern in the company. Trembling, she asked to speak. With teary eyes, she recalled the day Cláudio ridiculed her in front of everyone for walking into the wrong courtroom. He told her she didn't have the profile for law and that she was just another one who'd give up at the first challenge. The silence turned into stunned disbelief. Carolina had never spoken of that moment, not even to her closest coworkers. But now, inspired by Leticia's courage, she found her own strength. A strength that echoed through the room and made space for other stifled voices to rise. From that moment on, the testimonies came like a wave. A security guard told how he had once been denied entry to the shared break room because he stank of the street, words Cláudio used during a bad mood. An HR employee revealed that when she suggested a workplace empathy workshop, she was labeled overly sensitive and her proposal was mockingly shelved. And each of these accounts wasn't just venting, they were pieces of a puzzle of pain that was finally being laid out in full view. Letícia didn't interrupt. She just listened with the posture of someone who understands the weight of listening. At that moment, she was no longer just the new owner of the building. She was the catalyst of a healing process. And the stories shared that morning held a transformative power. Because once silence is broken, no one can pretend they didn't hear. And the most symbolic thing was what happened with the eyes. People who had never even looked at each other before started exchanging glances of complicity. There was shame, yes, but also relief, empathy, and even the beginning of reconciliation. Some apologized right then and there. Others committed to rethinking their habits and behaviors. Letícia closed the meeting in a simple yet powerful way. You no longer need to ask for permission to exist here. This space now belongs to everyone, and it will be protected. And so, with truth echoing through the walls, the air in the room began to change. But one decision was still pending. A decision that, for many, seemed unlikely. But for Letícia, it was inevitable. Letícia paused briefly, looked around, and said, "Every change requires courage. But courage without action is just an unfulfilled intention." She turned to Cláudio, who had remained at the end of the table, trying to look in control. "You are being dismissed from the company." Immediately, the sentence, spoken calmly, struck like thunder on a clear day. Faces turned, stunned. It was the moment many had dreamed of but never believed they'd witness. Cláudio, for a second, looked confused. Then he tried to laugh. Next, he attempted to justify himself. But Letícia, with unwavering firmness, interrupted. "There are things that words can't explain. They're explained through actions. And yours, unfortunately, were seen by everyone." She continued, now firmer, without raising her voice, but making each word feel like a verdict. "For years, you treated people like they were disposable. You made hurtful jokes, imposed fear where there should have been leadership. And today, after everything that has come to light, your presence here would contradict the new values we're building." There was no anger in her voice. There was purpose. It was the voice of someone who understood that justice doesn't have to be revenge and that dignity must be restored. That was one of the great stories of that day, showing that real power doesn't lie in humiliating those who made mistakes, but in protecting those who never had a voice. And in that moment, Letícia was raising a shield for everyone who had ever been made invisible in that place. The silence was absolute. Some employees were holding back tears. Others looked in shock. Cláudio gathered his things silently, his eyes red, but without the courage to face anyone. The man who had once been arrogant and authoritarian now left the building as if carrying the weight of every word he should have never said. Before closing the door for good, Letícia simply said, "May this be a new beginning for you, not a punishment." But here, there's no more space for disdain disguised as leadership. It was the end of a cycle, but also the prelude to something greater. Because life, with its precise irony, sometimes spins the wheel in ways no one expects. And that's exactly what happened. Months later, in a place far from that office, several months had passed since the company's complete restructuring. Letícia remained steadfast, now leading her foundation headquartered in the same building where she had once been invisible. On one of her traveling projects, she received an invitation to visit an NGO focused on legal education for youth in vulnerable situations. The place was simple, but it pulsed with purpose. As she entered the auditorium, Letícia watched volunteers explain basic concepts of civil rights, labor laws, and citizenship. She smiled subtly, seeing those young people empowered by knowledge. But she didn't expect what came next. Cláudio, wearing worn-out jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a badge that read volunteer. The one who once scoffed at the grassroots was now serving it. It was a moment full of symbolism. Cláudio saw her and froze for a second, unsure whether he should approach, but he did. With hesitant steps, head down, and a trembling voice, he said, "You don't have to greet me. I just wanted to say thank you." Letícia.com as always, just waited. He continued, "I had to lose everything to understand who I was, and I had to see who you are to discover who I needed to become." He shared how, after being fired, he dove into a painful process of self-discovery, faced public shame, suffered through crises but chose not to run. He sought therapy, began studying restorative justice, and started attending groups discussing toxic masculinity and abusive power. He said that, for the first time in his life, he was trying to do something that actually mattered. Letícia listened intently, not with judgment, but with compassion. That man was no longer the same Cláudio who mocked others in the elevator. He was someone in the midst of rebuilding, someone genuinely trying. And that, to her, had value. After all, how many stories of transformation are lost simply because no one gave a second chance? How many could change if just one person believed it was possible? Then, Letícia surprised him with a rare gesture. She extended her hand and said, calmly, "At my foundation, we have projects that need someone who knows the system from the inside. and is willing not to repeat the same mistakes. If that's your case, we have a lot to talk about. Cláudio, move it. Not that. And in that gesture, something new was born. Not a friendship yet, but a bridge between what was and what could still be. Slowly, Letícia began witnessing something rare. True transformation. Not the polished, superficial kind people staged to clean up their image, but a shift from the inside out. Cláudio wasn't just collaborating with the Foundation's social projects, he was diving into them with the same intensity he once devoted to profits. Only now, there was no more luxury, status, or private office. Instead, there was listening, service, and constant learning. In one of the projects partnered with public schools, Cláudio began translating legal jargon into plain language. He created simple guides on labor rights, citizenship, and the fight against domestic violence. The same man who once looked down on the people was now the bridge between the law and those long kept on its margins. Letícia knew how to recognize the value in that. After all, there's no transformation without consequence, and no awareness without pain. That's why she never treated Cláudio as a closed case, but as a case in progress, and that made all the difference. Instead of slamming the doors, she tested him, not with pressure, but with responsibility. A clear example of that was when she had him face people he had once ignored, to listen to them, apologize, and most importantly, learn. And he did. In silence, with eyes lowered, without rehearsed speeches. One of those people was Mrs. Marlene, the cleaning lady he used to overlook. She looked him in the eye and said, "We don't want you to pay, just to learn." And in that moment, one of the most beautiful stories Letícia had ever seen was born. The story of someone who, after falling, chose to grow. And that growth, contrary to what many believe, didn't come from motivational talks or YouTube videos. It came from living with the reality he had always avoided. Cláudio started eating lunch with the volunteers, waiting in line like everyone else, sweating through field work. He learned to listen to the stories of single mothers, of young people with no prospects, of people fighting to live on what he used to spend on a single dinner. And that's when he told Letícia, his voice breaking, "You know what the biggest prison is? The bubble. I lived in one, surrounded by ego and vanity." Letícia, he smiled. She knew true education doesn't happen within four walls, but in the meeting between different realities. And that encounter, for her, was the greatest symbol of progress a human being can experience. Only one final lesson remained, a lesson that would echo far beyond those walls. The Foundation's auditorium was filled with a nearly tangible sense of anticipation. People from different walks of life waited in silence, eyes fixed on the stage. Letícia walked up with calm steps, wearing the same sober suit she wore on the day she returned to the office the day everything changed. She brought no slides, no charts, no scripts, just her story, now used as an instrument for transformation. She began by saying, "For years, I was called invisible. But what no one realized is that, even invisible, I saw everything. And in that silence, I saw the true face of power." The room fell into deep attention. Each word seemed to sink in, not through the ears, but through the skin. Letícia shared how her journey had been built with bricks of silence, resistance, and humility. She said that more than being ignored, what hurt most was realizing that people were blind by choice. Some choose not to see because if they see, they'll have to change. She stated with the calm of someone who seeks clarity, not confrontation. She spoke of Cláudio, though never by name, transforming his figure into a symbol of many. She said true failure isn't falling, but refusing to learn from the fall. And that's when she posed a question that hung in the air like an uncomfortable mirror. Asterisk, how many times have you disrespected someone because you confuse simplicity with insignificance? Asterisk, the question echoed deeply. Many lowered their heads. Others stared ahead, as if just waking up. At the end of her talk, Letícia didn't ask for applause. She asked for action. She said, society doesn't need more diplomas on the wall. It needs more respect in people's eyes. She shared that her mission now was to shape human-centered, conscious, and ethical leaders, people who don't see someone else's profession as a label, but as part of their own story. What sustains a company, a city, a country, isn't who gives the orders, it's who serves. And the day we truly understand that, the world will change. As she walked off stage, she was embraced by young people, employees, and former colleagues not as a hero, but as a living example that yes, it is possible to change everything. Starting with how we treat those right next to us. Because some stories aren't meant to entertain, they're meant to wake us up. And now that you've heard this story, tell me honestly, how many times have you judged someone by their clothes, their job, or how they showed up in your life? How many stories have you ignored because you thought they had nothing to offer you? The truth is hard, but it must be said. The world is full of Cláudio's people who confuse status with human worth, who believe respect is a transaction instead of a basic right. But the world is also full of Letícia, people who observe, learn in silence, grow stronger through rejection, and at the right time, show that greatness doesn't wear a uniform. It walks with purpose. It stands with dignity. It speaks with courage. This story isn't just about justice. It's a mirror, a wake-up call, an invitation. Because maybe you've been Letícia, maybe you've been Cláudio, or maybe you were the one who stayed silent while others were overlooked. And that's okay to admit as long as you're ready to do things differently from now on. The message here is clear. It doesn't matter what your title is, what your badge says, or how many degrees you have. Every person has a story, and every story matters. What truly changes the world isn't grand speeches. It's the small gestures we repeat every single day. Start by greeting the doorman. Look the cashier in the eyes. Thank the person who cleans the floor you walk on. It might seem like nothing, but that's how we build collective dignity. So I'll ask you now, what will you do with this story? Will you just feel moved? Or will you start acting differently today? Drop a comment telling me what part touched you most. Let me know if this story made you rethink anything in your life. And share it with someone who needs to hear this message too. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's the time. Turn on notifications, because every week I bring real stories like this one to inspire you, challenge you, and help build a new mindset. Because in the end, we don't change the world through power. We change it through consciousness.